Hello again. I'm back with another clock to repair. This one is an Ingraham, and I found it off the website heirloomclocks.net from their list of wonder clocks, as in you wonder what to do with them because they don't work. This is how I received it in pieces, and I'll try to show what I have here. Obviously we have the clock mechanism and the case. The motor is not attached to anything, so I don't know yet if that works. I have the power cord with a label on it I'll get to. It came with glass wrapped up in bubble wrap here. Take a look at this. And the back plate. And also a couple of unusual pieces of wood, which I really wasn't sure what these were for. The label on one side reads Ingraham, and then it was written needs work, which is crossed out, and then parts only. On the other side, it's Ingraham SSD8, the model number, and in pieces, which is pretty obvious. What I was able to figure out is the mechanism. Well, let's see. Try to put this together a little bit. I can place the glass in first and then try to seat in the mechanism. So it's going to go something like that. But as far as these pieces of wood are concerned, I'm seeing holes in here, and based on the discoloration of the wood, I was able to figure out how these pieces fit in here. And it looks to me as if I would refer this to as a baffle to enhance the sound or increase the sound, possibly because this happens to be a strike clock. And that most likely makes it sound louder. Other things of note is that when I place the plate on the back of it, what are also missing are the screws or the nuts that hold the plate to the clock, along with the set knob. All those parts are missing, so I have to try to come up with those, assuming I can get it working. And what really caught my eye initially, I like the look of it because it looks more like a radio than it does a clock. But what I plan to do next is get this on my work table. We'll check the motor out first and then see if I can get it working. I also want to mention that I tried looking for this clock in my Ingraham book, and they did not have it listed, but I found other clocks with this model designation, the SSD. There was SSD1, SSD2, and so on, and those were all from 1936. So I think it's a pretty good bet that this clock was manufactured sometime in the mid-1930s. Okay, the first thing I want to do is hook up the power cord to the motor and see if it actually works. Let me just move this case out of the way. And this appears to be an original power cord, but it's in pretty good condition, so I'm going to use it. I'll just use a couple of wire nuts to hook this up. There's one. Okay, let me plug it in. Turn it on. And it's working. So very good. Let me turn it off. And what I'm going to do next is insert this into the mechanism to see if the whole thing works. Now the way this is supposed to fit, I believe this output gear fits in the hole here. And you can even see the outline, the circle here, where this fit. But the one thing I'm noticing and looking at it is that I have another part that's missing. I'll try to show it. These two posts here and here, there's actually a metal bar that's supposed to fit over this, and it gets screwed down, and that's what secures the motor up against the whole mechanism. So that's a part I do not have. I'm going to have to try to see what I can come up with, and because if I can't secure it, I'm not going to be able to get this working. So give me some time to figure out what I can come up with. Okay, I might have come up with something that works. I have these parts that I'm not really sure what they are, whether they're springs. I have a lot of these and various fasteners and nuts and bolts, that sort of thing. They're not clock parts. I don't know where these came from or what they were for, but my thought is if I can bend this straight, either end, that this just might fit over the two posts here. And I can probably drill a hole at either end here and then secure it with a couple of nuts, and that should hold down the motor. So that's going to take a while. Let me work on that, and once I've done that, I will continue. I think this will work. I straightened out the clip. I drilled a hole in either end, and it fits. So I'm going to secure the motor with it and see if it runs. I'm also using these pieces of wood to support the dial, so when I press down, I'm not going to damage the hands. Came up with a couple of nuts that fit here. What I'm going to do next is reattach the power cord and plug it in. Let me do that on my own. Once I'm ready to turn it on, I'll continue. I've reconnected the power cord. I have it plugged in. Let me turn it on. And it's running. Very good. But one thing I'm noticing is there's a lot of what looks like grease and oil that's been dripping out. You can kind of see it on the dial here. So I really want to take this whole thing apart and give it a real good cleaning. So that's what I'm going to work on next. The first step will be to remove the hands. Let me shut it off and get started on that. The hands are friction grip, so hopefully they won't be too difficult to remove. Yeah, try a bigger one. Well, a lot more difficult than I was expecting, so I'm going to do what I usually do, is place a little bit of WD-40 on the stem here, let it soak in. It really helps to loosen up the hands. So let me get some of that. Let me just remove the power cord before I do that. I really don't need it on at the moment. Okay, for the WD-40, I just spray a little bit of it into a cap. And then with a brush, just put a little bit of it around the stem. And I'll give it a good 10 or 15 minutes to let it soak in. Okay, it's been soaking for about 15 minutes and it should be easier to remove. Still a bit tight. There we go. Here's one. Now for the minute hand. Oh, very good. It's moving nicely. Yep. You know what? I don't want to damage the dial. There we go. Okay, the dial has a couple of metal tabs that fall down into these notches here. So, and what I like to do with these, now that I've removed it, this is where the 12 is. So I'll just mark it. That way once everything is disassembled, I can put it back together in the right position. Okay, I'm going to take a closer look at this now, see how I want to approach it, whether it's undoing these 4 nuts here and getting this plate off, or undoing it from this side. So let me figure out how I want to approach it, and then I'll continue. I've decided to take it apart from this end. I'm going to have to remove the motor first. Move this out of the way. But before I do that, I want to take several photos of how it looks on the inside, the arrangement of all the gears, so that I know how it's supposed to look when I go to reassemble everything. But first I want to go back one step. I was looking for more information on this clock, so I reached out to the NAWCC, the National Association of Watch and Clock Collectors, and one of their members sent me an advertisement for a clock very similar to this one, and this is what it looks like. It's the model SSD4, and the advertisement reads that it has solid walnut louvers at one end, and they're talking about these on the case, and that it provides what they're calling the miracle toned chamber, as developed for Ingraham radios, to emit the tone of the strike most advantageously. To hear how it sounds with the mechanism out of the case, I'm going to reposition the dial, and the minute hand was just about at the 8-minute mark, and I was able to come up with a set knob. See if I can get this on here. There we go. And when I turn it, let's get this set right here. There we go. Well, there you have it. It strikes. Except it looks like it's striking on the half hour when it really should be striking on the hour. So I'll have to figure out how to correct that. But in the meantime, I can go ahead and start taking this apart. Let's put these aside. Okay. First, to remove the motor. Now, in looking at it, what I'm seeing, I have 4 nuts over here. These 2 also hold the bell in position. I'm going to remove those, and then this plate, I think, is just going to come right off, and it'll expose all the gears. So let me start to work on that. I came across something that I think will be very helpful when you want to take one of these apart. I found it, I was watching a video on repairing a clock that I'm hoping to get to, one that I hadn't seen before, and the fellow doing it was using these, and they're called assembly post clamps, and I'll show you how they work. The problem is, once you remove this plate, when you go to set it down, because the stem that holds the hands is poking through, as soon as it hits the table, it pushes all the gears out of position. What this does, and what I've done in the past, is I try to find small containers or cups to rest it on so that that doesn't happen. The way these work, one here, one can go here, and one here. Now it's very secure, and when I remove the nuts and take the plates off, the gears are pretty much, hopefully, will just stay where they are. So let me get to work on that. I'm going to remove the 4 nuts, and there's a little lock washer here with it. And what I'll do is I'll note the link for the name of the company that sells these little support stands. Get out of there. There we go. There's 2. And this one should also remove the bell. Oh, and there's a, looks like washers underneath this as well. This went here. 1, 2 there. Okay. Okay, I'm going to try to lift up the plate. And this piece has come out. Fortunately, my photos that I took on the side, I know where the spring attaches to. There's another spring down here as well, but let's see what happens here. There you go. Okay, what I'm going to do now is take several photos of this arrangement and then just remove each gear one at a time, take a photo so I have a good record of exactly how these fit together. I'll also look to put this back on so I know where this is supposed to position as well. So let me work on that. Okay, I can show you how this comes apart. Let me zoom in a bit. Okay, this here and that. This is the hammer for the bell. Now, these gears here are attached on the inside. To free them up, I'm going to have to undo this plate here, which I'll work on next. Once they're removed, whatever I can remove, then I'll look to clean them up. To remove these, I can probably take off the support clamps at this point. And I have to undo these 4 nuts to get this plate off of here. Now, these nuts are actually attached to these posts. These are all going to be removed, and I'm going to need to mark them because I'm seeing that the stems here are longer than here. So I want to make sure I don't mix them up. So let me zoom out a little bit and I'll work on labeling everything. I've done 2 things here. One is the obvious, I just put the letter L for long, but I also scratch in an L because when this plate goes into the ultrasonic to get cleaned, that black marking is going to wear off. I'm also noticing there is some, looks like plastic washers in between the plates, and they're dry and they're crumbling up and falling apart. A piece just fell out as I turned it. Odds are I'm going to have to come up with some kind of a replacement washer to fit in there. It's sort of a spacer. Anyway, let's remove these posts next. These also have the little lock washers. And one more. Okay, this plate should lift up now. And here's what I was talking about. They're all busted up. All right, something else, another part for me to try to come up with. Now, in looking at these gears here, what I'm seeing, I'll try to show it. I call them C-clips. Small little clips here that are holding the gear in position. However, I think if I just submerge this whole thing in the ultrasonic, it should clean up really quite well. I fill it up with hot soapy water. I use Dawn dish detergent. Give it a good half hour. And then with a toothbrush, clean up any areas of dirt that might still be on it. If you don't have an ultrasonic, you can just use a toothbrush alone with Dawn detergent. It takes a bit longer, but that works pretty well also. Anyway, let me start by gathering everything up and cleaning it up. And once everything is cleaned, I'll continue. The parts have all been cleaned. I've also cleaned the glass and the dial as well as the hands. And before lubricating anything, the first thing I want to do is reattach this plate to this plate. And if you recall, this is where those little plastic washers had crumbled, and I've come up with some what I hope to be replacement ones. They're just about as thick as what I think was in there, and pretty much have to set up the stem. Goes in here, one washer here, this will fit over it, and then I just have to secure it with the washer and the nut. So I'm going to go ahead and do that to all four, and then I'll continue. The plates are back together, and the next step is to reposition all of the gears. But before doing that, you have to lubricate them. The way that's done is you want to use a synthetic clock oil, and you don't apply it directly out of the bottle. One drop would be too much. You want to get what they call an oil well. Put in a couple of drops. And then you're going to use what are known as oil pins. They're various diameters. They're very, very small. And you just dip this into the oil, and you only apply it to the ends of the gears, the pivots, a little at each end. You never apply it to the teeth. I'll also place some inside the openings where the gears fit that end up holding the hands. So let me work on that. Once everything's lubricated, I'll be ready to set the gears back into position. I'll show how everything goes back together. Let me zoom in a bit for it. That goes there. This one goes here. That fits here. This one is here. This is here. And lastly, the hammer fits here. So what I have to do next is reposition this plate on top and then hook the springs back up to where they attach. And that's going to take some time, so I'll work on that. Once everything is back together, then I'll continue. Okay, I've secured the plate. I have the gears in their proper position. I also reconnected the springs. There's one here and one over here. And what I want to do next is I'm going to reattach the motor. And I'll be placing the clip that holds it down in position. I will reattach a power cord, plug it in, and check to see that it's still running. So let me do all of that, and then I'll continue. The motor is on. I've attached the power cord and I have it plugged in. I want to seat the second hand. And let me turn it on. And it's running. So what I'd like to do next is turn it off for a moment. I want to seat the dial, and then I will place the minute hand on, and I want to try to synchronize exactly where the clock strikes. Okay, this fits right there. And I'm just going to place the minute hand on. And I'll advance it. Okay, it rang with the hand on the 7. I want this to be chiming at the 12. What I'm going to do now is continue to advance it. I'll stop it right about here, and now I'm going to turn it back on. And I'm just going to let it run for a few minutes and see exactly where it strikes. And wherever the hand is when it does strike, I'm then going to position both the minute hand and the hour hand on the 12, and that'll should accurately synchronize the clock. So I'll do that on my own, and once I am precise with the location of it, I will continue. I've got the hands synchronized so that it strikes on the hour. And there's a feature that lets you disable the strike. I'll try to show it. There's a small stem over here, and if you turn it just a quarter turn, and then rotate the hand, when it gets to the top of the hour, it no longer chimes. So I now have the clock working pretty much the way I want it to, and what I want to turn my attention to next is looking to restore the case. And the first thing I want to do is look to reposition these pieces of wood. One's going to fit like that, and the other one will be over here. And there's a couple of holes in the wood of each piece that matches some holes in the sides here. Whether this was screwed in or nailed in, I don't know, but I'm just going to place it where they belong, and I'll probably use a little bit of glue, maybe a couple of screws to hold it in. So let me work on that next. A couple of things here. I've realized that I don't have to glue this wood into position. I found a couple of screws that holds it in nicely. The problem, however, is once this is in place, I'm unable to fit the mechanism in here. So what I'm going to have to do is remove this, place the clock mechanism in position, and then try to slide in the pieces of wood and screw them into place. So let me remove that, and I'll be ready to give that a try. The wood is out. What I have to do, seat the glass, and then the mechanism. And now I think that'll work. Come on. And this piece will go here. And I'll just secure that with 2 screws as well. I'll do that on my own, and then I'll continue. I removed the wood from this side, but there's one change in plans, however. I realized once I have the mechanism in here, that pretty much limits what I can do to the case, but I still plan to restore this. And what I want to do, now considering this is just about a 90-year-old clock, it's really in quite good condition. However, there are a lot of scrapes, scratches, a few anyway, scuff marks. And I'm going to go over this first with a wood cleaner, and then I'll use my Howard's Restore Finish, which is going to blend in a lot of these imperfections, and then go over it with Howard's Feed and Wax. It's a wax polish. There's also a lot of scrapes and scratches on what looks like black paint around the trim here, so I'm going to look to repaint that as well. And once I get the case restored, then I'll go back to work putting in the mechanism and those pieces of wood. I'll try to show how good Howard's Restore Finish works. This is the product. And you can see here a few of the more obvious scuffs and scratches on here. And what you do is you wipe it on. And then you wipe it off. And you can see it really blends everything in quite nicely. Anyway, let me do that to the rest of the case, and then I'll continue. I've gone over the entire case. I think it came out looking good. And I've touched up the black trim as well. And it looks good enough that what I think I'm also want to do is the back plate has a few scrapes and scratches on it. I'm going to look to paint this as well. But the next step will be to place the clock mechanism back into the case. Okay, now I'm just going to reattach the pieces of wood on my own. They're back in place, and I also repainted the back plate. And what I have to do next is to reattach the power cord. And to do that, I have to pass it through the plate. And then I'll place a knot in the wire. That way it can't be pulled out from the back of the clock. And I'll reattach it with my wire nuts. And I'll do that on my own, and then we'll continue. The wire is attached. I placed a knot in it, and I can fit the back plate in position. And I've just run into one snag, and that is to get the nuts that fit here to hold down the back. These are what they look like. Sort of like a screw nut because it has a slot in the end. And the problem is the bracket or brace that I use to hold the motor down, the proper part has an L-shaped bend to it, so it fits all the way to the bottom of this post, so the whole thread is exposed. But it's sitting a little bit higher, and as a result, when I screw this down, it gets tight, but yet protrudes through the back, which means there'll be a lot of play. So I have to come up with a way to either a spacer, a washer, something to get this to be a tight fit. So let me look into that, and I'll see what I can come up with. I've come up with something that I hope will work. A handful of these little lock washers. And I find that if I slip these over the nut, get the plate down, that gets nice and tight, and there's no play in the back plate. Sticks out a bit more than I would like, but I think I'm fine with that. I've come up with a handful for the other one. And that is pretty solid. The last step, I have to reattach the set knob. And now I'm ready to set this up on my workbench and make sure that it's working. I have it set up. It's plugged in. Let me turn it on. And it's running. And now let's see if the strike functions as it should. Well, there you go. Not quite as impressive a sound as the advertising would make it out to be, but nonetheless, it's working. So there you have it. It's the Ingraham model SSD8 strike clock. I believe it was made around 1936. And I'm quite pleased how this one came out. I think it's a really good looking clock. I hope you enjoyed the video. Any questions and comments are always welcome. I try to answer as many of them as I can. And that pretty much wraps things up. Bye for now.